I would like to see a new relationship based more on trade, on cooperation, but as I say, with much less of this supranational element.
Well, I believe, like a lot of people, that originally the EU sounded like a great idea. It sounded brilliant when it was a small cluster of countries, of strong countries working together and trading together, but it seems to have exceeded its bounds and grown in ways that people didn't anticipate. For example, we've now heard that Europe is thinking of having its own army, which is quite a terrifying prospect.
It is possible, though I think highly unlikely, that David Cameron will get the sort of changes which he wants from our European partners. I think it's possible, but very unlikely.
Whatever you think of the Prime Minister's deal, he has at least fought the good fight. Let's start by being generous to him. He has argued very hard. He has been night after night fighting the case, and he's done all right.
Didn't ask for much, did he? I mean, all he's asked for is some minor changes to benefits and a couple of promises that might go in the next treaty. And the truth of it is, he can't deliver this deal because the European Parliament can strike down the benefits deal and the European Court of Justice can rule out everything else. So to say to people, please vote for this deal in a referendum when you can't guarantee delivering it, seems to me to be a rather weak position.
Indeed, I can tell you what the offer will be, and that is absolutely marginal and cosmetic. I haven't spent 16 years in Brussels and Strasbourg without hearing many, many European leaders repeating this sort of proposition. Juncker recently, Angela Merkel, they are all saying, yes, you might have some bits and pieces, but you cannot have the major issues. We will not get control of our borders. We will not reinstate the social chapter which Major negotiated and Blair gave away. We will not get control, for example, of our own energy market. None of those things will be on offer, and it will be completely marginal.
I think in the talk of reform over the past weeks, there's been way too much emphasis on what can we get back as a country, and not enough conversation about the fact that there are too many people in senior positions in the European Union who are unelected, and the fact that with low turnout as well, we're left with quite a gaping democratic deficit.
Amber Rugby.
To have democracy, it's not enough to have elections. You must have a body politic which is represented by a sovereign parliament, which can ask these questions of its rulers and can get rid of them. Now, the greatest economy in the world at the moment is the Eurozone, in terms of size, complexity, importance, and so on and so forth. It is run by the Eurozone, and it's run by the Eurogroup, right? Now, I can assure you that these decisions are made in a way that if you knew, it's a bit like sausages, if you know what's in it, you don't want to touch it. If you knew how the Eurogroup operates, would you believe it that there are no minutes taken so the citizens of Europe can never find out what their representatives said on their behalf? Would you believe that the ministers of finance sitting around that large rectangular table make decisions on Greece, on Portugal, on Spain, on France, without having been briefed about the data or the proposals that are being put before them to decide upon? Never briefed. Once I suggested that I send by email to the other ministers of finance my proposals regarding the bailout deal. And I was warned that if I do that, it would be casus belli, a cause for war. And any proposal that I emailed to my fellow ministers of finance would be disqualified from the conversation.
Why?
I never understood the answer to that question. I put it to them, and I was told by Dr. Wolfgang Schäuble, the German Minister of Finance, that if I did that, he would then have to be obliged to submit my proposals to the Bundestag, the federal parliament in Berlin, which I didn't think was such a disaster anyway. And then, if that happened, a debate on my proposals would begin in the Bundestag before we had it in the Eurogroup, which would mean that we wouldn't be able to have it in the Eurogroup. And if you do it, then I'm never going to discuss these proposals with you. This contempt for the parliamentary process, for transparency, is part and parcel of the democratic deficit.
We were told that when we had a president, we'd see a giant global political figure. The man that would be the political leader for 500 million people, the man that would represent all of us on the world stage, the man whose job was so important that, of course, you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous, and I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
Here in Britain, you have a system of government that leaves much to be desired. Yet, when George Osborne takes a decision, he has to appear in front of the House and defend it. And the House of Commons has the authority to dismiss him. Now, when we decide in the Eurogroup, we are the government, the economic government of the Eurozone, yeah? We make a decision based on precisely zero information. The decision has already been made behind closed doors in dark corners of those terrible buildings. We all then meet. The representatives of the Troika speak first. So first is the Commissioner, Mr. Moscovici, who speaks on any subject, Portugal, Greece, whatever. Then the President of the Central Bank, then the Managing Director of the IMF, which is not even part of Europe. Yeah? And then the ministers, on the basis of what they heard, not on any documents that they have in front of them, on the basis of what they heard from the Troika, have 10 minutes each to say some inanity, because you can't say anything serious when you are not briefed. And anyway, there's no negotiation. This process lasts for about half an hour, maybe 2, and then we spend 3 hours debating the only thing to which we're contributing, the press release. Yeah? And that's how European law and European economic policy decide.
Because I want a better deal for the people of this country, to save them money and to take back control.
Okay, well, let's speak more specifically about Norway. No input on EU policies if you were like Norway, but you have to play by the rules that are set by the EU. You have no representation in that. Is that okay with you, David?
Well, this is a myth. The Norwegian Parliament actually is only 10% of their laws every year is single market laws, which, yes, they get direct from the EU. But they have control of fishing, farming, trade, justice and home affairs, energy and the environment. Britain doesn't. The EU has that. So we get those powers straight back.
I think, like most people, I'm concerned about the overreach of Europe, and I also don't believe that the United Kingdom needs to tether itself to the managed decline of Europe. I think the UK has a much brighter future than that, and the way to achieve it is for us to be partners with Europe, trading partners with Europe, friends of Europe, but not necessarily in the European Union. It's not a realistic prospect that any European country is going to not want to trade with the UK. We also have export markets all over the world in the Commonwealth, countries that have much more in common with us in terms of national character. It seems to me quite an obvious proposition that we would, at this point, leave the EU.
My problem is with the bureaucracy in Brussels, and my problem is with finding ourselves in the wrong place in a changing world. The year that we joined the European Economic Community, the then 9 members, counting us, accounted for 36% of the world economy. Today, the 28 members account for 17% and falling. And this is a problem for this reason. I don't know whether anybody saw the Chancellor of the Exchequer's trip to China last week. And it was written up as a trade mission, a trade negotiation. But Britain, and even now, after more than 40 years of membership, this is not widely appreciated, Britain cannot sign an independent trade agreement with China or with anyone else. The EU speaks and votes for us in the WTO, as it has since 1973. Now, when we think that China, with all the news about the slowdown, grew at 6.1% this year, is supposed to grow at 6.5% next year, whereas the Eurozone has flatlined for 6 years, I would say that puts us in the wrong place. The EU has suspended its free trade talks with India. But EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, they expect to sign a comprehensive free trade agreement with India this year. Now, which of those arrangements would suit us better? Is there a country in this part of the world that stands to gain more from unrestricted commerce with that rising giant than us? You know, India is English-speaking, at least for business purposes. Common law, there are 1.4 million Brits of Indian origin. It's the fourth largest investor here, but we can't sign a free trade agreement with India because Italian textile workers don't want the competition and so on. Basically, we are in the wrong place. We don't sit on great natural resources in this damp, green, exquisite island of ours. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. Our trade with the EU is diminishing virtually by the minute. 20 years from now, it's going to seem bizarre that we were having this argument about whether to merge our political system with the rest of the EU in order to have a say over what might then be just, what, quarter, a fifth of our total exports? At what point do we realize that we have to raise our eyes to more distant horizons and rediscover that global vocation that previous generations took for granted? If you look at the European continent, you see a free trade area that stretches from Iceland and the Faroe Islands through to Turkey. It has some 45 states and territories, of which 28 are members of the EU, the others are not. The only European countries that have chosen to exclude themselves from a free movement, tariff-free, free movement of goods and services area are Belarus and Russia. I have never heard anyone in Brussels suggest that if Britain withdrew from some of the political institutions, common rules on immigration, foreign policy, and environment, and so on, that we would be excluded from the single market. No one has suggested that except British Yes campaigners. But let's look at what the trend is. In 2006, the EU was taking 64% of UK exports. In 2012, it was taking 44%. We are the fifth largest economy in the world. We are the fourth military power on the planet. We're one of the group of 7 industrialized nations. We're one of 5 permanent Security Council members on the United Nations. Our language is the most widely spoken on Earth. We have unparalleled links with the United States, the Commonwealth. We have the best universities in Europe. How much bigger do we have to be before we're able to run our own affairs, living under our own laws, trading and collaborating with our friends and neighbors, but governing ourselves?